Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to show you how to implement Google sign-in with Laravel API using Firebase. Most tutorials you are going to find online use Laravel Socialite, and the tutorial is also available on the Laravel documentation itself. But um, when you are building a mobile app or a front-end app that talks to your Laravel backend, you will need a way for users to actually sign up or log in using something like Google Auth. How do you achieve that via API? That is what I will be showing you how to do today. By the end of this video, you will have a Laravel API that accepts Google sign-in, validate or retrieve user from your database, and finally generate a token for future requests. We'll also build a small front end to test everything out so you can see a full flow in action. So what we are going to do now is we are going to create a new file that is going to contain both our backend application and our small front-end application. Make dir let me say Laravel social auth, and I'm going to go into that particular folder. If you already have the Laravel app or Laravel Composer installed on your system, or I even assume that you already have an existing Laravel application. For this tutorial, I'll be using Laravel version 12. So I'm going to initiate a new Laravel application. Say I'll call it backend. Now I'm not going to install any starter kits. Everything is going to install within a few minutes. Now, for the database, I'm going to be selecting SQLite because I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible. I assume you already have your own database. Now you can see it has created the table for us and it has already run the migration. So it is asking us, would you like to run npm install? Well, I don't want because I don't need any npm for this particular project. Now that we've done that, if we do ls, you can see we have our front end. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into our backend application like so. So we can see we have the list of all the projects that have been initiated for us. So the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to our code editor and open up this application. Now that we have opened our Laravel application, you can see this is a brand new Laravel application with nothing installed in it at all. So the next thing I'm going to do is I will need to actually install some packages. So one of the first package we are going to need to install is Laravel Sanctum. And if we come to our documentation, Laravel documentation, if you search for Sanctum and click, so I'll be using Sanctum as token for authentication. In order to install Laravel Sanctum in Laravel 12, all you need to do is php artisan install. And I'm going to come into our terminal and run that particular command. So what this will do is it is going to install Laravel Sanctum for us and all other requirements. Now we want to actually generate the migration. Yeah, and that is done. So the one thing I want you to also take note is remember we used SQLite, and if you are going to find that file, this is where the SQLite file is. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to connect to that database so that we can see the data in our database. So I'm going to test this connection and apply. Okay. So with PHP Storm, you can easily see the list of datas or the list of tables in your SQLite database. You can see we have the cache logs, failed job batches, and all of that. But the most important thing to us is the users table. We have the ID, the name, email, verified ads. I believe you already have this in your application, so I will not be um, wasting your time with that. So the next thing you want to do now is we actually want to install another package called Laravel Firebase. So if we come to our browser and search Laravel Firebase, you will see how to actually install. So the Laravel Firebase is what we are going to be using to interact with our Firebase app, and it will also enable us to be able to sign up or log in using the Google social auth. So I'm going to come back to our terminal again and install that particular application. Now, once we have that installed, the next thing I want to do is I'm going to create a new controller. I'm going to create a new controller. It's okay if you already have the controller in your application. So I'm going to call the controller, let me just call it, I'm going to call it Google Authentication, or let me just call it Firebase Authentication. Or I think I'll prefer. So I'm going to call it Google Authentication or Auth Controller. That's fine. Uh, so for this, I will need to say class. Okay, this is just creating a file for me. So I want PHP Storm to just create the folder application straight away. So I'm going to call it. So the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a controller, and which is called Google Auth controller, and I'm going to extend the base controller, although it is not necessary for you to extend the base controller. Now, when you install Laravel Sanctum, we need to actually do something. We need to make sure that this API token trait is declared on our user model. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to add that right there and import the class. Now you can see the class is imported from Laravel Sanctum, Laravel/Sanctum / Sanctum as API tokens. So this is what we enable us to be able to generate API tokens for our users. If we inspect this, you will see it has tokens, it has token can, different things. Then it has the actual token, the actual method for creating a token. So now that we've done that, the next thing we want to do is, now if you are going to um, do Google authentication using Firebase, you must go to your Firebase profile or Firebase console. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new Firebase project, or I can just use this existing Firebase project. Or let me assume that you are starting from the beginning. So let me create a new one. I'm going to call this Laravel Google, or let me just call it Socialite, right? Once you do that, you press continue, continue. Just leave everything in default like that. So I'm going to do default Firebase, blah, 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 create project. So within a very short time, a new project is going to be generated for us. Now that our project has been created, we are going to go into that project and create a new Firebase app. Now, there are different ways to create a Firebase app, or there are different. Google has given us some shortcuts, but since we are creating a web, you can, if you are doing Android, there's a way you are going to create it. If you are doing web, there's a way you are going to create it. But since we are building an API, right, and we are creating a front-end application to actually interact with the API, it makes sense to create a web app or follow the web model. So what will be the name of our web app? We can call it Laravel, or let me say code with T social auth app. You can call it anything you like, by the way. So I'm going to register the app. Uh, now, okay, now that we have gotten to the part that is related to a front-end application, the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to initiate a brand new front-end application for us. So I'm going to come back to the terminal and I'm going to make a new directory and call it front end. Now I'm going to go into the front-end application and I'm going to be using Vite to actually generate this application. In fact, let me remove it. rm uh, front end. So I'm going to be using Vite to generate this application. In order to use Vite to generate an application, all you need to do is to run this particular command. Sorry. So all you need to do is to run this particular command. And once you run the command, it will ask for the project's name. So I'm just going to call it front end. And I'm going to use vanilla JavaScript. We are not using any framework. I'm going to use JavaScript, and that is all. We have initiated a new project. So I'm going to go into the front end application, and you see there is some couple of things in there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to install, as we have been told, npm run install Firebase, right? Um, yeah, so our Firebase package is done installing. The next thing I want to do now is I want to open this front end application. So I'm going to open that in another terminal or in another code editor called WebStorm. All right, now I have opened the application that we just created, or the front end application we just created. So the next thing I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to be putting this. So you can see the files that have been created. You can see the source file. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start this application, and we can easily start it using npm pm run dev, like so. And I'm going to be opening it in my browser, localhost 517 and 3. Now, so that's our Vite application. So I'm going to be removing all of this. Let's see. I'm going to be removing this. We don't need it. I'm just going to clean it up really fast. Um, okay, now our application has been cleaned up. So what I'm going to do now is now, so our application has been cleaned up. You can see nothing is actually showing here now. So I'm going to come back to our initiation process. and I'm going to copy that and paste right into our main.js. So then I'm going to continue to console. So now we've created our application, right? The next thing is we need to actually enable, um, what's the name? The Google sign in. And in order to do that, you just need to come here and come to authentication, right? And click on get started. So what we want to enable is Google, right? So we can come here and click on enable, and then click on save. Now that we've done that, there is something else that we need in order to get this to work. We need a service account, the JSON of our service account that is tied to this application. So I'm going to come to project settings and I'm going to come to service account. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to generate a new private key, which is basically our service account. So generate. So you can see your private key gives access to Project Firebase service. Keep it confidential and never store in a public repository. Store this file securely because your new key can't be recovered if lost. So I'm going to generate it and it is going to download. So I'm just going to open this right inside our project right here. So this is what we need. This is our service account details. So we are going to need this in the backend as an environment, as an environment variable. Sorry. Now that we have everything that we need in terms of credentials and the likes, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a simple HTML page that will. So we already have the HTML page. I'm just going to add a button right here that will mimic, let me put this in presentation mode, excuse me, that will mimic what our button will look like on the client side or something. So I'm just going to create button and I'm going to give it an ID. Let me call it sign in button and this will probably be like sign in with Google. So we need to be able to access that button so that when they click that particular button, we will be able to fire the necessary uh, command. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to. So the next thing I want to do now is I want to access that button, const sign in button. So get element by ID. The name of our element is sign in button. All right, yeah. Let me remove that. So this will be in place of the button that you are using in your client side. So the next thing is I want to add an event listener. So I'm just going to, for now, I'm just going to do console.log sign in button clicked. Yeah, for now. So if we come back to our application and refresh, inspect, if I click on this button, if we inspect, we can see sign in button clicked. So that means our front end is working, right? So now let's go back to the backend, which is where the real work is, right? The next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new folder called services, or it's not necessary for, but let's just follow. And I'm going to create a PHP class, which I'm going to call um, Firebase auth service. Firebase auth service. Now, the Firebase auth service is going to contain, we are going to be importing certain packages, such as the Firebase we initially installed. So private, the Firebase auth service, let me auth, and you can see it's under, yeah, like that contract right there, $Firebase auth service. And I'm going to create a constructor which is going to access that service. So this constructor will help us to initiate this service. Let me close this DB. So the next thing is you need to create a method to get the user from the Firebase using the token that has been given to you by the front end application. So I'm going to create a method called Firebase public function get user from Firebase token. Now, the next thing is we need to first of all do some verifications. So I'm going to do try and catch. So the next thing is, first thing is I want to verify that the token that has been provided to me, call it Firebase ID token. The token that has been provided to me is actually a good token, or it is valid. So to do that, all you need to do is do, let me say, verified ID token. So you can see this thing is already calling it verify ID token. This is a method that is on the auth contract that we imported. So now this will either throw an error or it will pass it. Now, this is a type of unencrypted, unencrypted. You don't need to bother yourself about all this anyway. Unencrypted token. And so if for any reason this verification process actually failed, we want to catch the error and say failed verification verified token. Exception. Then we want to log the error, and we want to throw an exception. Throw new bad request exception from Symfony components. So we can just say that the token is invalid. The token is invalid, like so. Then there is another thing we need to catch. Let's say for some reason, the argument or whatever is passed into verified token is, or let's just catch a general exception, and I will log that exception and I will throw another exception. See, let's say token is invalid or an error occurred. Why verify? Or let's just say the token is invalid. Actually, I'm fine with that. Or please try again later. So now that we are certain that our token has been verified, the one way to retrieve the ID that is associated to the user based on that token is basically saying fire user firebase ID equals to the verified ID token, and from the claims you get the sub. So this is basically the ID of the user. Now the next thing is to retrieve the firebase user. Firebase. So this is for if you want to get the user firebase ID. But if you want to get the firebase user itself, all you need to do is firebase user profile. Then like so, using the firebase user ID that you retrieved, you can use it to get the firebase user. Once you get the firebase user, that means everything is good, right? So the next thing we want to do is we want to actually retrieve the user from our database, or check if a user already exists with the email of the user that signed up or signed in. So this will be firebase equals to firebase user profile email. Now we want to check if a user exists for that particular email address. So I'm going to say user equals to null for now, and I'm going to annotate it using the user model. So if the email is present, we want to actually retrieve the user that has that email, or check if there is a user that has that email, and we say user query where email, the first one, right? So if the user is found, that's fine. Otherwise, so this one else, we can just say this thing is invalid for now. The token is invalid because we could not find the email associated to that Firebase user. So if everything is fine, with we don't want that. Okay. Now if user, let's say the user is invalid, right? So if the user is invalid, that is, there is no user in the database with that particular record as at the time we got to this junction. That means we actually need to create a new user, right? We actually need to create a new user. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to initiate a new user profile, and I'm going to say user data, which is going to be an array, the email of the user. We are not storing the Firebase ID, so for now I will just ignore it. The name of the user. So you can retrieve the username based on the display name, Firebase user profile, the display name, and because for our database, if you look at our database migration, you will see that the password is not nullable. So I'm just going to generate a random password for the user. So in your own migration, please make sure the password is nullable. So I'm just going to say string support random password. Please do not generate a random password except that. So I'm just going to leave a little comment here. Make password nullable. The next thing is we probably want to set our email verified, because this is a user we are getting from um, we are getting from we are getting this user directly from this thing itself, from what's the name, from uh, Firebase itself. So that means the email is already verified. So email verified at, right? So if that is done, all you need to do is fill the user and save. Now, once we've done that, the next thing we just need to do is return this user. Once the user has been saved, the user that has been saved, then the next thing is we need to return. So if the user does not exist, we are creating a new user. But if the user already exists, we are basically returning the user. So the next thing we need to do now is go to our controller and make use of this particular class we have created. Now I'm going to create a method or a constructor that is going to import the particular service we just created, Firebase auth service, Firebase auth service, then a method that is going to use the public function sign in with Google auth, and a request. We are going to retrieve the token that is sent to us by the client side. Impute. Don't worry, I will show you how to retrieve it from the client side. We are going to get there in a minute. So this request class is wrong. Let me HTTP. It should be illuminate. Yeah, right there. So now that we've retrieved the token, the next thing is I want to get the user, like user, which will now be equals to this dot our Firebase auth service, and get user using that particular token. So if everything goes well, we are going to get a token that user is going to log in into our system with token, and that will be user dot create token or access token. Let me call it access token. Then we need to actually create token. This should be in plain text. Sorry, plain text. Then return JSON. No, sorry. Return JSON response access token, like so. Right. So, and now that we've done that, the next thing we want to do is we want to go back to our front end and try to see if we can communicate with our backend application. But before we do that, one thing we need to do is we need to actually define a method in our control and in our route that will allow us to call this particular API. So I'm going to go to the route file API, and I'm going to create a method route. It's going to be a post method. I'm going to sign up. I don't like this. So I prefer this method. Um, what's the name of our controller? Okay, Google Auth controller, Google controller class, and we are calling the, what's the name of the method? No, Google Auth controller class. we are calling this sign in with Google method. Right there. Yeah. So that will be the method that we'll be calling. So if we come to our terminal and try to list out PHP artisan route list. Yeah, so you can see that API sign up right there. So let me start our application, PHP artisan serve. So our application is in, let me just copy that base URL. So this is our backend application base URL, right? So I'm going to go back to our front-end application and I'm going to define that base URL, const backend URL will be equals to that, right? Okay, now let's begin with our front-end application. So there isn't much to do with this. All you need to just do is use the sign in with pop-up method that you can retrieve from your Firebase auth. So let's import Firebase auth. Import. There are some stuffs we need to import from Firebase auth, such as Google auth provider and sign in with pop-up. Sign in with pop-up like so, and get auth. Get auth. So this will be coming from Firebase slash auth, correct? So you need to call that sign in with pop-up. This should be in small letter. Yeah, correct. We need to call that. So now when the user clicks the button, we need to bring that pop-up, right? And that pop-up is basically, and the way we call it, the first thing we need to do is we don't actually need analytics here right now. Now that we've gotten initialized our Firebase application, the next thing is we need to get the auths and passing the app you are initializing auth for. Or let me just call it Firebase app so that I won't be confused. Firebase ads or Firebase auths. Firebase auths. Now that we've done that, we also need to get the Google provider since we are integrating with Google provider. So const provider, or let me just call it Google provider. We need to initiate that like so. Then call our sign in with pop-up method. Pop-up method and pass in the Firebase auth. It's expecting the Firebase auth and also the Google provider or the provider that you actually want to use. So once you do that, the next thing we need to do is just apply a then method. I will be using an arrow function, console.result, and I'm going to apply a catch, console.log error. So the next thing we need to do is to define the environment variable that will hold our service account in the backend application, because that is where we actually need this service account. So in order to achieve that, what I'm going to do is let's go back to the documentation. You notice that we need to actually define this environment variable. So I'm going to copy it and paste it right here. But what I'm not going to be doing is I'm not going to be defining it inside our storage app because this is not something that should be public, right? So although you may put it there maybe for your own, but it is not advisable. So I'm going to go to a website called jsonformatter.org, and I'm going to copy and paste that service account or JSON right there. So what we are going to do is we are going to tell it to minify it. So once it minifies it, it does it in such a way that everything is now in a single line. So I'm just going to copy it, then come here, paste into our backend application like so. Now our backend application can communicate with our front end application as well. So I'm going to refresh the application, and I'm going to try and sign in with Google. So the reason why this is going is because I already tried to sign in with Google before. So once you do this, you get certain parameters which you can see, and this is based off what we actually console logged in our application. So in order to move forward, all we need to do now is we need to actually send the token given to us by Google Firebase to our backend, so the backend can actually verify that the user is valid, and by calling our Firebase, so that way we are certain that our backend and our front end are using the same set of credential, right? So now let's get to it. So I'm going to create a method, and I'm going to call it send or function send to backend, right? And this will be expecting a token. Now this method, or let me just call it send token to backend. Now this method will be expecting a token, and I'll be using the fetch method to communicate with our base URL. Now remember, I already defined the backend URL earlier here, so this will be slash the URL we defined earlier, which is slash API slash sign up, and we need to define some command, which is a post method, as a content type. No, we are not performing any authorization. And the next thing is let's say accept application.json. Then the next thing is the body, which is basically the token. Then we need to get our response console.log. This will be data. Let me call this data. Then this will be dot catch console.log error. So now that we've actually created the function for sending the token down to the backend, the next thing we need to do is to actually retrieve the token itself. So in order to retrieve that token, all we need to do is do const id token equals to result dot user dot id, or get id token. I think is id token. I'm not sure. Well, let's find out. So this should be an async method, because this is like an await. So it should be get id token, correct? Get id token. So let's console log that id token and see what happens. Okay, yeah, so we can see the id token being retrieved. So the next thing now is we need to send it to our backend. Send id token to the backend. So let's refresh and log in again. Yeah, So we can see now we are getting our access token, which is basically what we defined in our controller. You can see access token. So with this access token now that we've retrieved, voila, you can now, the mobile app or the front end or the clients can easily now call your applications and any other places that requires authentication. So for a test, we can quickly do this. Let's go to our API. I think there is an application there. Yeah, we can quickly do this passing. So let's do this. Uh, After retrieving this will be data dot access token, right? Access token, but an underscore and like so. So let me see if I can quickly call the API. Let me say function retrieve authenticated user authenticated user. So this will be access token, and this will be API slash user, and this will be a get method. Of course, this will be bearer at the access token. Then we don't need to pass anybody. JSON. Then this one, let's just console log the user data like so. So with this, I can call console, or let me say retrieve authenticated user using data.access token. Let me make this into an async method to make our life much easier. I'll wait. Right. So let's refresh again. If everything works well, we should have a user logged to us. Yeah, confirm. So you can see we have the currently authenticated user, code with T, our Fikadewi, and the likes. So I'm happy we have been able to achieve what we have actually achieved. That is it anyway. We have successfully built a sign-in system for Laravel API using Firebase. Remember, this same API can be used for what's the name, for signing up. And let me quickly show us our database. Right, users. So you can see the user has been created in the database. So which makes perfect sense, right? Yeah. So we have successfully built a sign-in system for Laravel API using Firebase. We've created a new Laravel project, installed Sanctum and Firebase SDK. We configured a Firebase authentication, built an endpoint to verify Google tokens, uh, the Google tokens, and issued a Sanctum token for users for authentication. This approach actually works perfectly for mobile apps and SPAs and any system that needs API-based authentication. If you found the video helpful, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you'd like me to cover other type of login systems such as Facebook with the same method. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.